She asked a very small question.
Can I sit here?
Can I sit here? She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for help. She only needed a place to rest. But on a cold pier by the water, her question was met with silence. The Marine didn't answer. The crowd looked away. Only one being lifted his head and looked at her, a police golden retriever. What no one knew was that in that single moment, the dog sensed something the people around her had missed. Something that made him stand up. Something that made him break every rule he had been trained to follow. And something that turned an ordinary bench into the safest place a frightened child could be. This is not a story about a hero in uniform. It is a story about a heart that knew how to listen, without saying a word. The wind off the water had teeth that afternoon, the kind that slipped under your coat collar no matter how you turned. Out on the Elizabeth River, the light was thinning into a pale winter gold, and the gulls rode the air above the docks like they owned the sky. At the far end of the Veterans Pier in Norfolk, a few benches faced the water, old slats worn smooth by years of quiet conversations and people who needed somewhere to sit without being asked why. Emily Carter moved slowly along the boards, one careful step at a time. Her right hand gripped a cane with a rubber tip that squeaked softly when it met the damp wood. Her left hand held a phone that showed nothing but a dead black screen. She had pressed the side button so many times her thumb ached, as if persistence could bring the battery back from the grave. Behind her, cars came and went in the lot near the memorial sign. Ahead, the pier opened into space and salt air and a long stretch of benches. She should have felt safer out here, away from the traffic and the impatient looks, but the open space made her feel smaller, as if everyone could see her hesitation from a mile away. Her mother had said, "Just stay by the water, Em. I'll be right there." And then the call had cut out. Emily had waited at the entrance like a good girl, the way she'd been taught, but waiting was different when you couldn't sit, when standing still sent a deep ache up your leg and into your hip like a slow-burning warning. After 10 minutes, after 20, the ache turned sharp. The panic followed, not because she wanted it to, but because it always seemed to know the shortest path to her chest. She told herself not to think. Don't build a story you can't prove. Don't let your mind run ahead. She tried to count the wooden planks under her feet, tried to breathe in fours the way the school counselor had once shown her. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. But the wind stole the rhythm. A bench appeared on her left, empty, and she almost headed for it on instinct. Then she noticed the figure on the next bench, the one closest to the water's edge. A man sat there alone, posture straight even while resting. Like his, spine had been taught to stay disciplined. He wore a dark jacket with a subdued Marine emblem on the sleeve, the kind you didn't notice until you looked twice. A knit cap shadowed his eyes. White earbuds ran down into his pocket. His hands were clasped loosely, resting on his knees, and his gaze was fixed on the river as if he were watching for something only he could see. At his boots sat a dog, not just any dog. A golden retriever, broad-chested and clean-coated, the color of warm honey. He wore a working harness with patches that caught the fading light. Police K9 in bold letters. The dog's body was still, compact, patient. He didn't fidget. He didn't sniff the air the way pet dogs did. His attention had a weight to it, like a steady lamp turned low. Emily stopped without meaning to, her cane tip planted. She felt her throat tighten, not from fear of the dog exactly, but from what the dog represented. Rules. Authority. The kind of attention that made strangers start asking questions. The kind of attention that made people decide, in an instant, whether you belonged. She glanced back toward the parking lot. Her mother wasn't there. The phone still wouldn't turn on. Her leg pulsed with pain. Her breath was starting to shorten, little pulls instead of full inhales. She knew those signs. She hated those signs. She hated that her body would betray her in public like this. There was space on the bench, plenty of it, but asking to sit beside someone felt like asking for more than a seat. It felt like asking for permission to exist in their world for a moment. She watched the Marine's face from the side. He didn't move. He might not have heard her footsteps at all. The earbuds sealed him off in his own quiet. Emily's thoughts jumped to other benches, other days. The bus stop where a man had sighed loudly and said, "Can't you stand somewhere else?" The store where someone had stared at her cane like it was something contagious. The park where kids had laughed when she took too long to cross the path. None of it was dramatic in the big way people talked about on the news. It was worse than dramatic. It was ordinary. The dog's head was angled slightly forward, ears relaxed but alert. A working dog. A serious dog. Not the kind you ran up to and petted without asking. Emily knew enough about that. Her aunt had once told her, "Police dogs aren't like family dogs, sweetheart. They're on duty." Emily swallowed. Her mouth was dry. She tried to decide if she could reach the empty bench farther down without her leg giving out. She could try. She could keep going. But the river seemed to stretch longer now, and the wind seemed colder. Then the dog's eyes moved. Just a small shift, but unmistakable. Cooper, she could see the name stitched near the handle of his harness, lifted his gaze from the water and looked directly at her. Not at her cane, not at her shoes, at her face. His eyes were dark and clear, and the look wasn't sharp or suspicious. It was focused. A steady, quiet assessment, as if he were listening with more than ears. Emily froze. Her heart stumbled once, then sped up. Her fingers tightened on the cane until her knuckles whitened. The Marine didn't notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. He remained turned toward the river, still as a marker stone. A gust pushed through the pier, rocking the small flag on the memorial sign behind them. Emily's balance shifted. She corrected quickly, but the movement sent a shot of pain up her leg. She sucked in a breath and tasted the metallic edge of panic. "Don't make a scene," she told herself. "Don't cry out here, not in front of people, especially not in front of a Marine and a police dog." But her body didn't care what she wanted. She took one step closer to the bench before she could talk herself out of it. Her cane tapped. The dog's gaze stayed on her. She felt it like a hand on her shoulder, steady, present. Emily's voice came, out smaller than she intended, carried off by the wind for a second before it reached them. "Excuse me," she said. The Marine didn't turn. Maybe the music in his ears was too loud. Maybe he was somewhere far away in his own mind. Emily tried again, a little louder, then softened immediately, as if she'd broken a rule. "Sir, can I—" Her throat tightened. The word "sit" seemed enormous, heavy with all the other times she'd asked for something simple and been made to feel foolish. She looked at the river, then at the bench, then at the dog's calm face. Cooper's tail didn't wag. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He just watched her like he was waiting for the rest of her sentence. Emily forced the question out, one breath at a time. "Can I sit here?" For a moment, nothing happened at all. The Marine stayed facing the water. The dog stayed still. Even the gulls seemed quieter, riding the wind above them. Emily felt the silence press in. In that pause, she heard her own heartbeat too clearly. She imagined the Marine turning, frowning, saying no, telling her to find another bench. She imagined the dog rising, blocking her, making her step back in humiliation. She imagined the people in the parking lot watching her stumble away. Her fingers trembled around the cane. And then the dog blinked, slowly, and lowered his head just a fraction, as if he'd made a decision about her that had nothing to do with rules. Emily didn't know it yet, but the seat beside a Marine was about to become the safest place on that pier. She only knew she was standing on aching legs, waiting for an answer that hadn't come, while the river kept moving like time didn't care. The silence stretched longer than Emily expected, long enough for her to regret asking at all. Her legs trembled now, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that she did. She shifted her weight carefully, the way she had learned to do when her body began whispering warnings. She could no longer ignore. The Marine remained still, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the water. The earbud stayed in place. From the outside, it might have looked like indifference, but inside Daniel Moore's head, the world was loud in a way no one around him could hear. The music playing through his earbuds was low and steady, something instrumental his therapist had suggested. No lyrics, nothing that could pull memories up by their roots. Even so, the river in front of him refused to stay just a river. Some days, moving water helped. Other days, it brought back flashes he didn't ask for. Sand instead of wood beneath his boots, heat instead of cold, a horizon that promised trouble instead of peace. He had come to the pier straight from the VA clinic, his jaw tight from answering questions he hated. "How are you sleeping? Any panic episodes this week?" He had lied politely, the way he always did. Easier that way. The bench by the water was his compromise with himself. Sit. Breathe. Let the noise inside your head settle before you go back out into the world. Cooper sat at his feet, solid and warm, a living anchor. Daniel trusted the dog more than he trusted his own instincts some days. Cooper noticed things Daniel missed when his thoughts folded inward. Cooper stayed present when Daniel drifted. Daniel hadn't heard the girl's footsteps. He hadn't heard her first attempt to speak. He was only dimly aware of someone nearby, a shape at the edge of his focus, until Cooper's posture changed. It wasn't dramatic. Cooper didn't rise or tense. He simply lifted his head and angled it slightly, the way he did when something required attention. Daniel felt the shift through the leash before he consciously registered it. The leash went from slack to expectant. Daniel frowned slightly and reached up to pull one earbud free. The wind rushed in, carrying the smell of salt and the distant hum of traffic. He turned his head just enough to see what Cooper was looking at. That was when he saw Emily. She stood close to the bench, closer than he would have expected anyone to stand without speaking first. Her cane was planted carefully, her shoulders drawn in like she was bracing for impact. Her eyes flicked between his face and the open space on the bench, already apologizing for something she hadn't done yet. Daniel's first instinct was irritation, sharp and quick, the kind that surprised him even after all this time. He hated being startled. He hated feeling unprepared. For half a second, his mind jumped to training, to procedures, to the unspoken rules about space around a working K9. Then he saw her hands shaking. It wasn't obvious unless you were looking for it. A slight tremor in her fingers, the way her grip tightened and loosened on the cane, as if she were testing whether it would hold her up. He noticed the way she leaned just a little too much on her right side, compensating without realizing it. Behind her, a woman stood a few yards away, older, gray hair pulled back neatly, eyes fixed on the scene with attention Daniel recognized. The look of someone who wanted to help but didn't know how without making things worse. Daniel swallowed and took the second earbud out. He should say something. He knew that. He just couldn't find the right words fast enough to keep up with the moment. Before he could speak, Cooper shifted again. The dog's attention never left Emily, but his body angled slightly toward Daniel, a silent check-in. Cooper had learned that move early in training. See something. Flag it. Confirm. Daniel looked down at him, then back up at Emily. The cold crept into the pause, filling the space where an answer should have been. Emily's face flushed. She nodded quickly, as if she'd already heard the no forming in her head. "It's okay," she said, too fast. "I can find another place. I just—" Her voice wavered, then steadied again with visible effort. She took a small step back, her cane scraping against the wood. The sound made Daniel wince. He recognized that sound, the sound of someone retreating before they were pushed. "Wait," he said finally. The word came out firmer than he intended, carrying the weight of command without the softness he meant to add. Emily froze, eyes widening. For a heartbeat, Daniel worried he'd made things worse. "I didn't hear you at first," he added quickly, lowering his tone. "Sorry." Emily nodded again, but she didn't move closer. She stayed exactly where she was, like someone waiting to be told where the line was. Daniel glanced down the length of the bench. There was plenty of room, more than enough. And yet he felt the familiar hesitation rise in him, that instinct to keep distance, to control variables, to avoid situations that could spiral. Before he could overthink it, Cooper stood. Daniel felt the leash tighten in his hand and looked down sharply, ready to give a quiet correction. But Cooper didn't move. Forward. He didn't posture. Instead, he turned in a slow, deliberate arc and stepped onto the edge of the bench, placing himself sideways, his body aligned with the wood. Emily's breath caught. So did Daniel's. Cooper lowered himself carefully, settling along the far end of the bench, his weight shifting until he was pressed against the outer slat. The space he left behind was unmistakable. Open. Intentional. The dog then looked up at Emily again, calm and steady, and waited. Daniel stared at him, stunned. Cooper had been trained to follow commands, to hold position, to prioritize safety. This wasn't any of that. This was choice. The older woman behind Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Emily didn't move at first. She looked at Daniel, silently asking if this was real, if she was allowed. Daniel felt something inside him loosen, something he hadn't known was tight. He shifted to make more room, his movement slow and obvious. "You can sit," he said quietly now. "If you want." Emily nodded, her eyes shining in a way that made Daniel look away for a moment. She eased herself down, careful and deliberate, settling into the space Cooper had made for her. The bench creaked softly under the new weight. The river kept moving. The world didn't end. Cooper stayed exactly where he was, a warm presence at Emily's side, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. Daniel looked out at the water again, but this time the noise in his head was quieter. Something important had just happened, and he had the strange sense that it wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. For a brief moment after Emily sat down, the world felt almost normal. The bench creaked beneath them, the river whispered against the pilings, and Cooper's steady warmth at Emily's side acted like a quiet promise that nothing bad was about to happen. Emily rested both hands on her cane, breathing carefully, matching her breath to the slow rise and fall of the dog's chest beside her. Daniel kept his eyes on the water, but his attention stayed tuned to the space between them. He could feel Emily's tension like a low hum, could sense the way she was trying not to take up too much room. He recognized that effort. He'd lived most of his life doing the same thing, just in a different way. Behind them, footsteps approached, heavy, uneven, carrying the faint smell of alcohol and cigarette smoke. Daniel noticed them instantly. Cooper noticed them sooner. The dog's ears shifted. His body didn't stiffen, but his presence changed, subtle and unmistakable. Emily felt it before she understood it. Her shoulders tightened, and she glanced over her shoulder. A man in his late 40s stopped a few feet away, hands shoved into the pockets of a worn jacket. His face was red from the cold, or the drink. It was hard to tell which. His eyes flicked from Daniel's jacket to Cooper's harness, then lingered on Emily in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, his voice louder than necessary. "Didn't know this was reserved seating." Emily's stomach dropped. She stared down at her hands, the old familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up her neck. Daniel turned this time. He didn't rise, but his posture shifted, subtle and firm. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man snorted. "Just admiring the setup, marine, police dog, and—" His gaze returned to Emily. "Guess they'll let anyone sit anywhere these days." Mrs. Brooks stepped closer from where she'd been standing, her jaw tight. "Sir," she said evenly, "there's no need—" "Relax, lady," the man cut in, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm just saying, some of us don't get special treatment." Emily felt the words land like stones. Her grip tightened on the cane until her fingers ached. She could hear her own pulse again, loud and uneven. "I didn't ask for anything special," she said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "I just needed to sit." The man laughed softly, a sound without humor. "Yeah? Looks like you got more than that." He took a step closer. Daniel was on his feet instantly, training overriding everything else. "That's far enough," he said, his voice low but unmistakably firm. The man's eyes flicked to Cooper, who had risen as well, not in aggression, but in alignment. The dog positioned himself slightly in front of Emily now, his body angled just enough to block her without touching her. His gaze never left the man's face. For a split second, the tension crackled. A few people farther down the pier stopped walking. Someone muttered, "It's a police dog." "Easy," the man said, holding up his hands halfway. "Didn't mean anything by it, just making conversation." "Then you can make it somewhere else," Daniel replied. The man's jaw tightened. His eyes darted around, catching the attention of the onlookers. Pride flared, sharp and ugly. "What? Now I'm being threatened for talking? That dog trained to bite or what?" Emily's breath shortened. The sound of the word bite echoed in her head, louder than it should have. Her foot slipped slightly on the damp wood, and before she could correct herself, the cane wobbled. She lost her balance. It happened fast, too fast for thought. Her cane clattered to the boards, skidding away. Emily reached out instinctively, her heart slamming against her ribs as the pier seemed to tilt beneath her. She never hit the ground. Cooper moved. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He stepped sideways and forward in one smooth motion, placing his body between Emily and the open space, bracing just enough for her to catch herself against his shoulder. His stance was solid, practiced, like he'd done this before. Emily gasped, grabbing the edge of the bench with one hand, the other sinking into the thick fur at Cooper's neck. The dog stayed perfectly, still, a living wall. Daniel's hand shot out, steadying Emily's elbow. "I've got you," he said. The man swore under his breath. "Jesus, I didn't touch her." "No," Daniel said, "but you caused it." Mrs. Brooks picked up the cane and handed it back to Emily, her hands gentle. "You're okay," she murmured. "Just breathe with me, sweetheart." Emily nodded, tears blurring her vision. She hated this part, the way her body betrayed her, the way strangers always seemed to turn it into a spectacle. She could hear murmurs around them now, feel eyes pressing in. The man shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't want trouble," he muttered. "I was just—" "Then go," Daniel said. There was no anger in his voice now, just finality. The man hesitated, glancing once more at Cooper. The dog met his gaze without hostility, without fear, just certainty. With a shake of his head, the man backed away, grumbling as he went. The crowd slowly dispersed, the tension leaking out of the pier like air from a punctured tire. Emily sagged against the bench, exhausted. Her breathing came fast and shallow, the beginnings of something worse, tightening in her chest. Cooper turned his head slightly, bringing his face closer to hers. His eyes were calm, intent. He lowered his head until it rested gently against her knee. Emily felt the warmth seep through her jeans, grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. Daniel watched the dog, a realization settling in his chest. Cooper hadn't just reacted. He had chosen. And for the first time since Emily had spoken that simple question, Daniel understood that whatever had drawn Cooper's attention wasn't an accident. Something deeper had been unfolding from the moment she stepped onto the pier. Something none of them could walk away from now. The air around the bench stayed tight even after the man disappeared down the pier. Emily's hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on the cane, and her breath still came too fast, too shallow, as if her lungs had forgotten how to work without being reminded. Daniel crouched slightly in front of her, his voice low and steady, guiding her the way he'd once guided injured civilians through smoke and chaos. "Slow breaths," he said. "You're safe. Nobody's touching you." Emily nodded, though the word safe felt fragile in her chest. She tried to match her breathing to his count, but it was Cooper who anchored her. The dog shifted his weight and leaned closer, his shoulder firm against her leg, his head resting there as if it belonged. The warmth spread upward, quiet and reassuring. Daniel noticed it then, the way Cooper stayed pressed against her, not guarding, not alert in the way he'd been trained, but present. This wasn't a defensive posture. This was comfort. "Cooper," Daniel murmured, a reflex more than a command. The dog didn't move. That alone would have been unusual enough. Cooper was disciplined to the point of predictability. He responded to tone, to posture, to the slightest pressure on the leash. But now his focus remained entirely on Emily, his breathing slow, his body relaxed in a way Daniel had only ever seen at home, off-duty, late at night. Mrs. Brooks stepped closer, kneeling on Emily's other side. "May I?" she asked softly. Emily nodded again. The older woman's movements were careful, practiced. She took Emily's wrist gently, not to restrain her, but to steady her. That was when she noticed the bracelet. It was pale blue, plastic, worn smooth with use. Medical alert. Mrs. Brooks's fingers paused, her eyes sharpened, scanning the small engraved text. She didn't read it aloud, but her expression changed, deepening with concern. "Daniel," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off Emily. "She needs to stay seated for a bit." Daniel followed her gaze. He saw the bracelet then, the way it peeked out from under Emily's sleeve, unnoticed, in the chaos. His jaw tightened. He knew those bracelets. He'd seen them on wounded vets, on kids during disaster response. They meant this wasn't just fear. This was physical. Emily noticed their attention and flushed. "I'm okay," she said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. "I just get overwhelmed sometimes. It'll pass." Mrs. Brooks smiled at her, kind but not fooled. "Of course it will," she said, "but there's no rush. Let your body catch up with you." A few yards away, the sound of angry footsteps returned. Daniel turned just as Rick Halston reappeared at the edge of the pier, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice carried in the cold air. "Yeah, I'm telling you," Rick said loudly. "Marine, K-9 unit, something's going on out here. Real strange." Daniel straightened, instinct flaring. "Sir," he said sharply, "you need to leave. Now." Rick looked at him, irritation flashing. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Cooper lifted his head at the sound of Rick's voice, but instead of turning toward him, the dog pressed closer to Emily, placing his body fully between her and the open space of the pier. It was deliberate, protective, and completely against protocol. Daniel felt a jolt of disbelief run through him. Cooper had been trained to face a threat, not turn his back on it. Trained to engage, not withdraw. "Cooper," Daniel said again, firmer this time. The dog did something that made Daniel's breath catch. He climbed fully onto the bench, not clumsily, not in a rush, but with careful intent. He positioned himself lengthwise along the edge, his back to the river, his front angled inward, creating a clear boundary around Emily. His body formed a barrier without a hint of aggression. No bared teeth, no raised hackles, just space, claimed and held. Emily stared at him, stunned. He's not supposed to do that, is he? Daniel didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He was too busy, watching his partner do something he'd never been taught, something no manual covered. No, Daniel said finally. He's not, Rick scoffed. Looks like your dog's confused. Mrs. Brooks stood then, her spine straight, her voice calm but unyielding. No, she said. He's very clear. Rick hesitated, glancing at the small crowd that had begun to gather again. The attention seemed to drain the fight out of him. He muttered something under his breath and turned away, his call unfinished. As he left, Mrs. Brooks let out a slow breath. That dog, she said, looking at Cooper with something like awe. He didn't just react. He chose. Emily reached out without thinking and rested her hand on Cooper's neck. The fur was thick and warm beneath her fingers. The trembling in her hands eased little by little. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Daniel shook his head. You didn't, he said. Not even a little. He glanced at Cooper again, still holding his position, still calm. A thought settled into Daniel's mind, quiet but undeniable. Cooper hadn't just responded to a fall or a raised voice. He'd responded to something deeper, something he'd recognized before anyone else did. Mrs. Brooks's eyes returned to the bracelet on Emily's wrist, then to Daniel. She's wearing that for a reason, she said softly. Daniel nodded. Yeah, he replied. I think he knows that. The river moved on beside them, indifferent and steady, but on the bench something fundamental had shifted. The rules had bent. Training had given way to instinct, and Cooper, who had followed orders his entire life, had just done the one thing no one had taught him. He'd listened to his heart. Emily's tears came quietly, the way they always did when she was trying not to make anyone uncomfortable. They slid down her cheeks and disappeared into the collar of her coat as she stared at her, lap embarrassed by how small she suddenly felt. Cooper stayed close, his head resting against her leg, his breathing slow and deliberate, as if lending her his rhythm. I'm really sorry, she said again, her voice barely above the sound of the water. I didn't mean to make a scene. Daniel sat back down beside her, careful not to crowd her space. You didn't, he said. Sometimes things just pile up. That doesn't make it your fault. Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. Her body still felt unsteady, like it hadn't quite caught up with what had just happened. The sharp edge of panic had dulled, but the aftershocks lingered, leaving her tired in a way that sank into her bones. Mrs. Brooks crouched in front of her again, her movements gentle and respectful. May I take a closer look at your bracelet, sweetheart? She asked. Emily hesitated for half a second, then turned her wrist. The pale blue band caught the light, the engraved letters worn smooth by time and use. Mrs. Brooks read it silently, her lips pressing together as she did. Mobility impairment, she said softly, mostly to herself. Panic episodes, heart condition. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at Emily with new understanding, seeing not just a nervous girl, but someone carrying more than most people ever noticed. You don't have to explain anything, Mrs. Brooks said quickly, meeting Emily's eyes. I just want to make sure you're all right. Emily swallowed. I get dizzy sometimes, and when I get scared, my chest starts to hurt. My mom knows what to do, but her voice broke. She was supposed to meet me here. When was the last time you talked to her? Daniel asked. This morning, Emily said. Her phone died, I think. Mine too. She lifted the useless black screen in her hand, then let it fall back into her lap. I thought I could wait. Mrs. Brooks nodded slowly. Waiting can be harder than people think. A few yards away, Daniel noticed Rick again, lingering near the railing, his phone back at his ear. He wasn't yelling now, but the way he kept glancing toward them set Daniel's nerves on edge. Cooper noticed it too. The dog lifted his head, ears angling toward Rick, but instead of turning his body, he pressed his shoulder more firmly against Emily's leg. Emily felt the pressure and, without thinking, matched her breathing to the steady rise and fall beneath her hand. "Good boy," she whispered. Daniel heard it and felt a strange tightening in his throat. Cooper had been praised by commanding officers, by trainers, by people who measured worth in results and discipline. This praise was different. It was simple, grateful. Mrs. Brooks followed Daniel's gaze. "Is that man bothering you again?" she asked. "He's making a call," Daniel said. "About us." Emily stiffened. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Daniel said immediately. "You didn't do anything wrong." Rick lowered his phone and met Daniel's eyes across the pier. There was something calculating in the look now, something that didn't sit right. He turned away and walked toward the parking lot, his shoulders tense. Mrs. Brooks frowned. "I don't like that." "Neither do I," Daniel replied. Emily's breathing hitched again, the beginnings of another spiral. Cooper responded instantly, lifting his head and nudging her knee gently with his nose. It was a small motion, almost playful, but it pulled her attention back to him. "Hey," Daniel said softly, leaning just enough to catch her eye. "You're okay. Stay with us." She nodded, focusing on Cooper, on the warmth and weight of him, on the simple fact that he was there. Mrs. Brooks reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded tissue, offering it to Emily. "I used to work triage," she said, as if explaining herself. "You remind me of some of the bravest patients I ever met, the ones who apologized while they were hurting." Emily gave a shaky smile. "I don't feel brave." "Most brave people don't," Mrs. Brooks said. Daniel glanced down at Cooper again, a realization settling deeper now. This wasn't coincidence. Cooper had locked onto Emily before the confrontation, before the fall, before anyone had raised their voice. He had seen something, smelled it, sensed it, recognized a vulnerability the rest of them had missed. The thought sent a chill through Daniel. Cooper had been trained to detect explosives, narcotics, human stress patterns in hostile environments. He'd been trained to notice danger before it announced itself. And he had chosen Emily. A sudden sound cut through Daniel's thoughts, the squeal of tires in the parking lot, followed by raised voices. Rick's voice carried faintly, sharp and agitated. Mrs. Brooks straightened. "What's he doing now?" Daniel stood, his hand tightening on the leash. "I'm not sure," he said, "but we're about to find out." Cooper rose smoothly from the bench, but instead of stepping toward Daniel, he hesitated, looking back at Emily. The dog's body language was torn between training and instinct. "It's okay," Emily whispered, surprising herself. She reached out and touched his shoulder. "I'm okay." Cooper held her gaze for a moment longer, then shifted, placing himself at Daniel's side, but not without casting one last glance over his shoulder, as if memorizing where she was. Daniel took a breath, scanning the pier, every sense alert now. Whatever Rick had set in motion, it wasn't over, and the quiet moment on the bench, the fragile calm Cooper had created, felt like the eye of a storm. Something was coming. The voices reached them before the people did. Sharp, impatient words carried across the parking lot, followed by hurried footsteps on the wooden boards. Daniel straightened fully now, his shoulders squaring the way they always did when instinct took over. Cooper stood at his side, leash loose but ready, his body alert without being tense. Emily felt the change immediately. The calm Cooper had given her moments earlier began to crack at the edges. She looked toward the sound, her stomach tightening. A woman came into view first, walking fast, her coat unbuttoned despite the cold. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, hair pulled back too tight, phone clenched in her hand. Her eyes locked onto Emily with a mixture of relief and irritation that made Emily's chest seize. "There you are," the woman snapped. "Do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you?" Emily shrank back on the bench. I was waiting for my mom," she said. "She told me to stay here." The woman scoffed. "Your mother should have known better. Come on, we're leaving." She reached out. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you need to slow down." The woman stopped short, startled. Her eyes flicked to his jacket, then to Cooper. "Who are you?" she demanded. "This is none of your business." "My name is Daniel Moore," he replied evenly. "And before anyone leaves, I need to know who you are and why you're taking her." The woman's jaw tightened. "I'm Carla. I'm her guardian." Emily's breath caught. She shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered. "She's not. She's just helping while my mom—" "Emily," Carla said sharply. "Stop it. You're confused. You're coming with me." Mrs. Brooks moved closer, her voice firm. "If you're her guardian, you won't mind answering a few questions." Carla's eyes flashed. "I don't owe you anything." Cooper shifted then, stepping slightly forward, his body angling protectively in front of Emily again. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply took up space, his presence unmistakable. Carla noticed him and took a step back. "Get that dog away from me." "He's staying right where he is," Daniel said. "Now, you said you're responsible for her. Tell me her medical conditions." Carla opened her mouth, then hesitated. She has trouble walking. Anxiety. That's all?" Mrs. Brooks's expression hardened. "That's not all," she said. "And if you were caring for her, you'd know that." Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. Memories surfaced unbidden, raised voices, being pulled by the arm, being told she was too slow, too sensitive, too much trouble. Her hands shook violently now. "I don't want to go with her," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Please." Carla's patience snapped. "This is ridiculous," she said, lunging forward again. "You're making a scene." Cooper reacted instantly. He moved between Carla and Emily in one smooth motion, his body low and solid, eyes locked on Carla's face. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't snap, but the warning was clear in every line of his posture. "Ma'am," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the air like steel, "do not touch her." People nearby had stopped walking now. Phones came out. Whispers spread. Carla's face flushed. "You can't do this," she said. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." Mrs. Brooks reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "Help is coming," she murmured. Daniel had already pulled his phone free, dialing with one hand while keeping his eyes on Carla. "This is Staff Sergeant Moore," he said into the phone. "I need local police and medical assistance at the Veterans Pier. Possible endangerment of a minor with medical needs." Carla froze. "You called the police?" "Yes," Daniel replied, "because something isn't right here." Emily felt Cooper's presence like a wall at her side. The dog turned his head briefly, checking her face, then returned his attention to Carla without moving an inch. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Carla's bravado faltered. She took a step back, eyes darting toward the parking lot. "This is a misunderstanding," she said weakly. Emily's tears flowed freely now, but she didn't look away. "My mom would never leave me with you," she said. "She promised." The sirens grew louder. Cooper remained still, unwavering, a quiet sentinel between a frightened girl and a woman who claimed authority she could not prove. Daniel watched his partner with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Cooper had not escalated the situation. He had contained it, controlled it, protected without harm. As the first patrol car pulled into the lot, Daniel realized something that settled deep in his bones. Cooper hadn't just sensed Emily's fear, he had sensed the truth, and everything that followed would prove it. The first patrol car rolled to a stop at the edge of the pier, its lights flashing but its siren mercifully silent. The red and blue reflections rippled across the water and climbed the wooden posts like restless ghosts. A second car followed close behind. People who had been lingering nearby stepped back instinctively, forming a loose circle that left Emily, Daniel, Mrs. Brooks, and Carla at its center. Emily felt the attention like weight on her shoulders. Her hands trembled again, and for a moment she thought her legs might give out completely. Before the fear could crest, Cooper shifted backward just enough for his flank to touch her knee. The contact was light, intentional. A reminder. "I'm here," Daniel said quietly, glancing down at her. "You're doing fine." Two officers approached, measured and alert. One was a woman with graying hair tucked neatly under her cap. The other, a younger man who scanned the scene with careful eyes. They took in Cooper's position, Daniel's posture, Emily's pale face, and Carla's rigid stance in a matter of seconds. "What's going on?" "Here?" the female officer asked. Daniel spoke first, his voice steady, professional. He explained what had happened, starting with Emily being separated from her mother, the confrontation with Rick, and Carla's sudden appearance. He didn't embellish, he didn't speculate, he simply stated what he had seen. Carla crossed her arms. "This is blown way out of proportion," she said. "I was asked to keep an eye on the girl. She panicked, that's all." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Carla hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before reaching into her purse. Cooper noticed. The dog's head lifted slightly, his gaze locking onto Carla's hands. His body remained still, but a tension rippled through him, subtle and controlled. Emily followed his gaze and felt a surge of dread. Her chest tightened again. "She doesn't know," Emily said suddenly, her voice shaking but clear. "She doesn't know what's on." "My bracelet." The officers turned to her. "What do you mean?" the younger one asked. Emily swallowed hard. "If she was really taking care of me, she'd know. She'd know what to do when I get scared. She'd know what happens when my heart starts racing." Mrs. Brooks placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "She's right," she said. "I checked the bracelet myself." Carla's face drained of color. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're listening to a child who's clearly upset." "Ma'am," the female officer said evenly, "we listen to children all the time." She took Carla's ID and stepped aside to make a call. The younger officer knelt slightly to bring himself to Emily's level. "Emily," he said gently, "can you tell me where your mother is?" Emily shook her head. "She was in the parking lot. She said she'd be right back. She's never gone this long." Cooper let out a slow breath, almost a sigh, and shifted again. This time he moved closer to Daniel, his shoulder brushing the Marine's leg. Daniel felt it immediately. "What is it, buddy?" he murmured. Cooper didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Carla. The officer returned, her expression now guarded. "Daniel," she said, lowering her voice, "there's an active note on this woman, a temporary guardian order that was revoked last month. Ongoing investigation involving neglect of a dependent." Carla's composure shattered. "That's old," she protested. "It was a misunderstanding." The officer shook her head. "It wasn't." Emily gasped softly, a sob breaking free at last. She pressed her face into Cooper's neck, clutching the harness with both hands. The dog remained steady, absorbing her weight without shifting an inch. Daniel felt a chill pass through him. Cooper had reacted before any of this had surfaced. Before IDs, before phone calls, before confirmation. He had known. The younger officer stood and spoke into his radio. "We need EMS here as well," he said. "The child's experiencing distress." At the sound of his voice, Cooper did something that surprised everyone. He gently took the hem of Daniel's jacket between his teeth and tugged, once firm but controlled. It wasn't panic, it was direction. Daniel followed the pull instinctively, stepping half a pace back, creating more space between Emily and Carla. Cooper released the fabric and returned to Emily's side, positioning himself squarely between her and the woman who was now being questioned by the officers. Mrs. Brooks stared. "I've never seen a dog do that," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "Neither have I." Carla was led a few steps away, her protests fading into the cold air. Emily watched, shaking, but she didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Cooper lowered his head onto her lap again, grounding her as her breathing steadied. Daniel knelt beside her, his voice quiet but firm. "You did exactly right," he said. "You told the truth." Emily nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "He knew," she whispered, looking down at Cooper. "Didn't he?" Daniel looked at his partner, at the calm certainty in the dog's eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "He knew." As the officers continued their work and the pier slowly returned to its hushed rhythm, one truth stood clear above the rest. From the moment Emily had asked for a place to sit, Cooper had recognized something no one else had seen. Not just fear, not just pain. Danger. And he had never stopped protecting her from it. The ambulance arrived without urgency, its lights dimmed, its presence calm. The paramedic knelt beside Emily and spoke to her the way people do when they want to be understood, not obeyed. Mrs. Brooks stayed close, answering questions when Emily's voice grew tired, her hand never leaving the girl's shoulder. Cooper remained where he was, his head resting gently on Emily's lap, rising and falling with her breath. The paramedic glanced at him once and nodded. "He's helping," she said simply. No one argued. Daniel stood a few steps back, watching the scene unfold with a strange mix of relief and awe. For years, he had trusted Cooper with his life in situations that demanded strength, speed, and obedience. Today, the dog had shown him a different kind of courage, the kind that couldn't be taught. A radio crackled near the patrol car. An officer spoke quietly, then turned to Daniel. "They found her mother," she said. "She collapsed in the parking lot earlier, dehydration and exhaustion. She's conscious now and asking for her daughter." Emily lifted her head, hope flickering through the exhaustion. "She's okay?" "She will be," the officer replied, "and she's on her way." Emily exhaled a long breath she'd been holding for hours. Her body sagged slightly, and Cooper shifted with her, adjusting just enough to keep her steady. Daniel watched, the way the dog moved, instinctively compensating, never losing contact. When Emily's mother arrived, pale but upright, the reunion was quiet and fierce all at once. Emily leaned into her, crying freely now, and her mother held her as if she might disappear again. She looked at Cooper through her tears and whispered, "Thank you," with a depth of feeling that needed no explanation. As the paramedics finished their checks and the officers wrapped up their reports, the pier slowly returned to its earlier stillness. People drifted away. The river continued its patient movement toward the open sea. Daniel walked Emily and her mother back to the bench once everything had settled. The sun was lower now, the sky streaked with soft oranges and purples. The wind had eased. Emily paused in front of the bench and looked up at Daniel. "Can I sit here again?" she asked. Daniel smiled, a small, genuine curve that felt unfamiliar on his face. "You don't have to ask," he said. He stepped aside, making room. Emily sat, slower now but steadier, her cane resting beside her. Cooper climbed up without hesitation, settling at her side as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Emily laughed softly, the sound surprising even her. Daniel remained standing for a moment, then sat as well, feeling the quiet settle around them. He reached down and rested his hand on Cooper's head. "You did good," he murmured. Cooper didn't look up. He didn't need to. Emily gazed out at the water, her face calm in a way it hadn't been all afternoon. "He knew," she said quietly, "before anyone else did." Daniel followed her gaze. "Yeah," he replied, "some things don't need words." The sky darkened, the first stars faint but present. A bench that had once felt like a barrier had become something else entirely. Not a place you had to earn, not a place you had to ask permission for. Just a place where you were allowed to be. As they sat there, together, marine, dog, and girl, the river carried their reflections away, and the pier held the memory of a simple question that changed everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness don't just offer a seat, they offer safety. If this story touched your heart in any way, I'd love to hear from you. You don't need to write a long message. Just type 1 in the comments if you believe kindness still exists. Or type 0 if you think the world needs more moments like this. Your comment helps this story reach someone else who may need it today. And if you want to keep watching stories about quiet courage, unexpected heroes, and the bonds that change lives, please consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are waiting, and the next one may stay with you longer than you expect. Thank you for being here.